All right.
I'm calling our work session to order. Kelly Douglas, please take roll.
Thank you. Chair Kelly Sloop.
Here.
Vice Chair Vidal.
Here.
Director Shoemaker.
Here.
Director Salvaggio.
Here.
Director Wyatt.
Here.
Thank you.
Well, welcome to our first Monday evening meeting in daylight savings time. So it will feel earlier, as we go. And we are going to, our teaching and learning team are going to hop around and talk with you this evening. And took this report, it's a goal that we all have had to have data reports, quarterly data reports, but want to kind of use this evening to not go into one thing in great depth, but give you some pieces. And there is data in your folders to look at in more depth. Do a little bit, discuss, and find out mainly what is important to you to have these reports be. We've heard a lot from you about it's how we use the data that's most important to you. And so we are really, really taking notes and looking at this as a starting point. And just, as you know, last year we had one of these, and OSAS, the things listed there, which are very much things that most, school districts report. And it was kind of like a quantitative thing. You saw some numbers, you saw some bar graphs where things are. This report, we're looking at what are we really doing, because we have been doing a lot of work with social emotional learning and looking at that as how does that fit with academic learning. There's this thing called the SEED survey, where that is not just a West Linn-Wilsonville piece, but the state is collecting that data. And so we want to introduce ways we're looking at that together, some levels of data, looking at progress, and then a little more. I know Greg James talked about that at the last report a little bit. You heard about how some teachers are using it, but want to get more into that. Then we don't know if they'll be quarterly anymore, if you want to do one every quarter, but you don't have to. But starting next school year, there are going to be requirements from the state of Oregon that there be data reports and that there's public reporting about data and what that looks like. And so that it's not maybe the same thing that's pushed out in the school report cards, but something that gets more at what we're doing with it. But we wanted to use this session to kind of guide that a little bit. ODE is going to be setting growth targets in that, and we will be speaking about that more and more, but just know that that's coming. There's a requirement to use interim assessments K-8 3 times annually. We have been using an interim assessment since 2012, so that's not news for us, but we always think we could do more with it. So one of the things is this idea that there's these levels of data and the OSAS and all of that, high level. When we look at the things that are showing during the school year, how are we doing, MAP, AIMSWEB, and even looking at the panorama surveys, that's kind of this directional data. But then what about things about students' skills and experience, and some sessions that we have where we listen to students, some things that Lauren Grigsby is going to be sharing with you, that also can be level 2 and level 3 are interacting, but it helps us monitor learning. So these are the ones you've seen. This is familiar. You've seen this before, and that's level 2. MAP, you've seen before. Panorama, and looking at that is something that we are going to be talking more about, and this whole idea of student self-efficacy. So that said, what we'd like to do is just start out, and we're going to have these, as we talk, pauses, and not just wait and show you things and then ask at the end. And some of this might shift, but if we're looking at even achievement data, we know that you hear from families all the time, and that you have some things that you might want to know more about, and that we want to be really clear and public about what we're sharing about data. So we just wanted to open it up this first round and look at what are some of the things right now that come up the most. And you're going to see us taking notes tonight quite a bit too. Just thinking about what are some things that, just based on overall, when you've heard reports before, when you're thinking about the report cards come out every year, when you're thinking about things you're asked about, what are some things just starting out? And we're going to return to these questions, but just wanted to know from the get-go, what are some things that you think you'd like to understand about and achievement, how students are doing academically?
What you're hoping to learn more about tonight?
Well, one question that I have is based on the assessment data, and if it shows that there's needed areas that need attention, so how do our teachers pivot to come up with a way, whether it's a certain group of individuals in a class or it's grade, throughout the grade that they're missing one element, and so how is that collaborating with the teachers? How do you pivot, and then how is that implemented and then tracked?
And actually, Greg James is going to be touching on that.
Oh,
this evening, so that's
so much. Okay.
Thank you. We didn't plan that question.
I just love an update on how they're doing with reading, given the primary, given the new curriculum. So how is that going? An update on that. And how they're moving from like maybe the top of the pyramid from the red to the yellow. I love that. And then also I have some concern about math, especially, for our older primary students and then the middle school grades. And then of course, I would love an update on graduation rates. And then I'd love to see those broken out into demographic groups that we've discussed previously, like by like socioeconomic data, our students of color, students who speak English as a second language, all those groups we've talked about before. So I just love some updates. Thanks so much.
Dr. Spagio?
And I love the when we are presented with data like this and are able to see what's going on within the district. I'd also like to see more about comparing that to similar districts, statewide trends, national trends, because as much as I like when the good numbers are going up and the bad numbers are going down, it's helpful to kind of put into perspective, well, what's a normal amount for, a particular variable? What's a normal rate for a particular thing? And of course, if we do see dips or spikes, if that's unique to us or if we're seeing that happening all over, are we weathering that better or more poorly? I think that context is very helpful.
I agree with that.
Yeah, so some things that are important to me. One is that we be able to see data over time, consistent data over time, so we can say, here's where we were this year, last year, the next year, right? There's so much to the question, how are we doing? That it's a bit overwhelming, right? And there are lots of ways to show that we're doing well, even if in other areas we aren't doing well. But I would like some data that is so consistent over time that we can say, what's changed that this is now on the rise and this isn't. And I continue to be someone focused a little bit on skills, right? So reading and math skills, and how our students compare not only to the state, but nationally when possible. It's why a state test is an easy thing to look at, because like, okay, everybody in the state took this test, here's some data. That's challenging, but that's something that is helpful to me too. So, yeah.
I don't think I have anything else.
Okay, well, that's our brief opening. And again, we're trying to kind of, in the spirit of a work session, we're not going to go around and answer everything tonight. We have some of these pieces that are there, but subsequently, this is what's coming because this is what you're asking for. And we expect that this will grow and shift over time as well. So now Jennifer is going to start to do a dig in.
Thank you for taking your card with me. Appreciate that.
She might come back, so
We'll see.
keep an eye on the shuffling cards.
Great. Well, that was really helpful to hear what you're thinking, and some of those questions we will be answering very directly tonight, and some of it will guide us as we keep trying to match what is most supportive to you as school board members, and as in your as key communicators around the district, what we can bring forward, knowing there is so much data that we're always thinking about. One of the questions was about how are teachers using the data and how do we compare over time? And so I'm going to touch a little bit on a couple of those. One of the things that I wanted to share is a little bit on behalf of all of us is we're always trying to say what indicators can we think about together to think about how is the whole child doing. They're just indicators, and the assessment only touches on some things. There's lots more about kids that's never going to be captured in any kind of quantitative number. But one of the things that we've been working on, and this has really changed in the last few years, our ability to bring those different pieces of data together in one dashboard or space where we can look more holistically. And so this is a dashboard that we have that shows, this is a high school at a moment in time across 4 indicators. So we can see this in any school at any given different time periods throughout the year. Primary, I think, has 4 time periods, and high school has like 6 time periods because it aligns with report cards, progress notes, that kind of thing. So at any time in an academic way, how are students doing? In the primary schools and the middle schools, that bar is very skills-based, Director Shoemaker. It's tied to assessments, how they performed on specific assessments. At the high school level, it's tied to grades, because when we're at the high school level, that's often the the bar we're trying to reach towards graduation, et cetera. Attendance is defined by the state, and behavior has to do with office discipline referrals. That's the behavior tracking system that we have, and then SEL has to do with students' performance on how favorably they answered questions about their social awareness, their growth mindset, their sense of belonging in that Panorama student survey. So first wanted to just give you a visual about what our principals and what our district leaders can access at any given time. That gives us just almost a dashboard light. And then you have the ability to really drill down in lots of different ways to learn more about what's going on for students. So this same school, that was the Progress 1 at a high school. And then at the end of semester, or at that same school, things had shifted, right? So we have many less students that we have grades we're concerned about. The red is they had the grade of a D or F, or yes. Attendance, we've had more time for kids to miss some school. So attendance issues have gone up a little bit, that sort of thing. This survey on October 30th is actually pulling from the last year. Now we had a new survey, so there's new social emotional data in there. So these dashboard indicators are updating at different times, trying to keep it all as fresh as possible. So one of the questions was, well, what do we do with data that we receive? So for example, if I had drilled down right here and clicked on this, I'd be able to see at an instant all the students that had an F of their report card at that time at the high school level, or students who had shown that level of achievement in primary middle. So just sticking with the high school example for a second, I did that, drilled down, pulled up a student, redacted their name, so that you could get a little sense of, started off the year, looks like this shows the lowest grade for that progress time. So the lowest grade started was as an F, and then by the next one it was a B, and the next one it was a D, and then a B. So what do we do with that? Who's tracking that? Who's paying attention to intervene to support students to be more successful or address the learning needs that they might have? All within the same system. So this is all within the same dashboard, every screenshot that I'm bringing forward here. That same student, I pulled a little capture on Progress 1. We could see that that F that we were concerned about up there was in a particular class. And what happened in between were conversations with the teacher and the student, the counselor and the teacher. What do we need to do to help this student be more successful in this class? And you can see a trajectory over time that they ended up earning a B in that class that you might have been very concerned at the beginning of the year. So we have both departments, teachers are monitoring these grades constantly. What is it that students are missing? What skills do they need? Do they need another opportunity to show their learning? How can they move forward? So that's a little bit about how that grades part can play out at the classroom level. We also have that in the same dashboard. If we drill down in terms of attendance, very easy to see if there were patterns, like a whole red block as they've missed the whole day. At high schools and middle schools, we're often thinking about period attendance. So the little dots, are they missing lots of the same period? We can check that out easily. We can also easily look into, this is about growth mindset. What's the student's belief that they can impact their success in school? Do they believe if they work hard that they can continue to improve? And so you can track that. And Dr. Shoemaker, you were talking about over time. We have stayed with the same areas in the Panorama survey over a number of years so that we can really help track that over time for students on an individual level and also at the school level. One other quick slide before we go back to some time for your reactions and questions. More about the what do we do with when we notice that this one is not from a high school, this one's actually from a primary school, but the processes are similar. So within this same dashboard, if we had a student who is, we're learning through or looking at all of the assessments that they need some additional support, we can easily track an intervention plan, write it up very quickly right there in that same system. And if I were to drill down on that student, I could see what their goal was, what their individual graphs towards their progress towards their goals. But as a principal or an assistant superintendent, if you want to pop in there and say, how many students are we, doing some extra plans for at this point? We might call those tier 2. Students that are still getting the same instruction as everybody else, but also needing additional support or additional ways of thinking about those tier 2 plans there. And then you would expect a much smaller number of students who, even with that support, that wasn't meeting their needs. So now are we doing some more intensive intervention or what we would call a tier 3 plan. What's very supportive about this is we can easily see, are they being completed? Are the students meeting their goals? And having all of that information in the same place is supported. We can track plans for reading, we can track plans for behavior, we can track plans for math, all in that same system. So my goal with kind of giving you that overview was to let you know some of the tools that we brought to bear for our teachers, our school counselors, our administrators, to track these things at the macro level and the micro level to make sure we're making a difference for kids. The other piece that I put in there for you were just the actual screenshots of data of our 3 high schools on this sort of dashboard that might give you more context for whatever wonderings you might have from semester 1, that point. So the same point in time at those 3 high schools. So now that was a little overview from me, trying to tie back to some of your questions with some examples. So again, now's the time for your other questions, reactions, going deeper, anything that stands out to you as we look at this holistic look, what the tool is or how we might use it, and anything else you might want to know about how we take action steps throughout the year to try to help more kids be successful every day.
And Dr. Swizard, one thing we realized when we planned it this way, there'll be a time when somebody's not talking for a minute when you're looking at something, and that can be awkward in meetings, but we know that giving you this, you might need a minute or so to look before you have something to say. Should have said that at the beginning, that in the spirit of a work session, want you to have a chance to look and consider.
I was hoping you could define what the colors mean. That would be helpful. On the thermometer looking on these graphs. Yeah.
Yeah, and so what's a little bit tricky about that is we have the ability to do some definition that is, so like the attendance ones are the same across levels, but the academic ones are different across levels.
Okay, sure.
So
Like for high school.
Yeah.
High school. Yeah.
yes, for high school, that the red is having a D.
Okay.
Red is an F, yellow is a D.
Oh, okay.
1, so just 1, their lowest grade in
Okay.
that order. Great.
What about attendance?
Attendance is, Con just walked out of the room.
It's okay.
It's tied to being on track.
Okay.
Basically,
So
the
number.
state, what we know from research is attendance matters.
Yes.
And if students are on track to meet at least 90% attendance,
Okay,
that's what we're working towards.
okay.
So that 70% would say that 70% of our students are attending at least 90% of the time.
Correct.
Okay,
At that moment in
That's
time on
cool.
October 30th, and then
Okay.
by the time we got to January
Yeah.
27th.
okay. That's helpful. Thank you.
On the multi-tier systems of support, like, can you like give examples of what tier 2, tier 3 would be? And then how do you document that?
Yes.
To show that it's being worked on?
Yes. So if I may, I might talk about a primary school in terms of a tier 2 intervention, and then I'll give a high school example as well. So a primary school intervention, we know that a really strong evidence-based practice for students who may be struggling with some behavior at school is what's called a check-in, check-out system. And there are some very specific elements about someone, the trusted adult, meeting with the student at the start of the day, helping review a couple of key goals for them, and then meeting with them again at the end of the day and giving them feedback in a positive way about their progress, and that progress notes going back and forth to home. Those are some of the key elements. So one of our primary schools that was saying, hey, we really want to not feel so spread out. We're trying to come up with lots and lots of different plans. We're going to take this one strong evidence-based practice, and we're going to think about that as our main tier 2 intervention for kids who are having some behavioral or regulation challenges. And so they really leaned into that, trained people how to do it really well, what are the critical elements of that, and then having good systems of review. How are kids doing? What's the progress? And then when kids have done well, which most have, then they exit them out. And they've gained some more skills. And those few that haven't done as well, then it's time to say, okay, that didn't work. Let's get a little more individualized and go a little deeper. Instead of just tier 2 often are either sort of general evidence-based practices or oftentimes group interventions, things like that. Whereas a tier 3 by definition is going to be very individualized and more people around the table saying, what's going on for this student? How can we better support them in this particular context? So that helps a little bit with the tier 2 and tier 3. At high school, I can think of 2 different tier 2 interventions. One was an attendance intervention around sending positive. So we had found out from 8th grade for incoming 9th graders, 8th graders who had struggled with attendance. And so those students were put into a tier 2 group, even at the very beginning of school, which this was kind of a different idea for us because often we're like, fresh start, here we go. But we thought, let's fresh start with some real positive connection. And so those 9th graders, that during those first 2 weeks of school, every time that they attended school, they got either a positive phone call home or a positive postcard home. And then at the end of 3 weeks, they had a pizza, connection lunch together. And we saw really good progress. So a number of students that came into Wilsonville High School that had had challenging attendance in 8th grade started with really strong attendance in 9th grade. A couple didn't, and those moved on to tier 3 where we brought some more wraparound, learned a little bit more about, goodness, there's some things going on here. Maybe there's a counseling need or some therapeutic supports or some other things, but just those positive connections and being able to track that and have some data to help us guide who that was working for was very supportive.
Early in my first term, during one of my school visits, I had a chance to see like this amazing data bulletin board in the teacher's office where it was, by class, by student. So this has replaced that system at this point. So we've gone from like the analog like little cards to this dashboarding system. So does that mean that now we'll have this data throughout a student's entire career, or, because will it jump from primary to middle to high school? So we'll be able to see some of those trends over time. And then did we capture any of that data from the old way that schools were doing it to be able to put into the system? Or are we just starting with this new approach of having all of this digitally?
It's a great question, and I think people respond and interact with data in different formats. I'm thinking about a principal who absolutely everything's in here because it pulls from Synergy. The things that can pull from Synergy do pull from Synergy, so it makes it easy. Not the intervention plans get put in here directly because those aren't in Synergy, but attendance, behavior, grades, assessments, those pull from Synergy, so that just makes it easy. I was just gonna say one of our amazing administrators who just is a paper person. So yes, it's here. They also drew out a big chart pack thing at their staff meeting because they found that to be really supportive. So I think, in the spirit of universal design, we may still have people that do some paper things, but it will be tracked in here long-term and allows us to move forward. And the fact that it's in Synergy is our official system. So it, all of our records that maintain over time are maintained through Synergy. I think, yeah.
Thank you. So going back to that thermometer thing, the last column, which was the student growth mindset, I think, is that self-reported by students?
Yes, so this is what the indicator that we use is a survey. So it is self-reported by students, 3rd through 12th grade. So this, we don't have the efficacy around really young children and filling out their own survey isn't there. So we have 3rd through 12th grade, and we focus on a number of different things in that survey. So belonging, social awareness, school climate, growth mindset, self-efficacy.
Relationships.
Yes, all of those things are in that survey. And so back to Director Vidal's question about what do the categories mean and comparisons to others, we've stuck with it because of the value of staying with something over time. There are some things about the survey that were like, ooh, if I were designing it, I might do it a little differently, but it's trade-offs. Number one, there are national norms for every one of these answers, so we can easily pull data on those social emotional outcomes compared to national norms. So that was one of the questions that you had brought up earlier. One of the other things here is about favorable on that topic, or favorable and those pro-social topics. If Dr. Ludwig was designing this would be light green, because when kids are asked, do I feel belonging at my school, the question of that's kind of the neutral answer is in this scoring goes into yellow. Whereas some of us might think the neutral answer might be this. So that's just a little bit of our talk behind it. So we get more concerned when we're in the red in that scenario.
Follow up? So I guess one would, I think, tend to assume that with like a little 10%, positive, like, yes, I feel efficacy, whatnot, that the academics wouldn't be, academic attendance and behavior wouldn't be so high. So is there a reason that seems to be consistently lagging, or is that normal?
Yeah, I think the national norms help us know it is very normal. And when you're asked, like, I can always solve all my problems, probably very few of us are going to be up in the dark green. We might consider it very typical or favorable that I can usually solve problems, which would be more in that light green.
That seems almost like it's trying not to get more of that dark green, because I don't know anyone that can always solve all the problems.
We also, the questions, this has come up a number of times for families, especially when we first started doing the survey, because people hear social emotional learning. They're like, what does that mean? What are you asking my kids? The survey questions are all public. Anyone can look at them. I'd be happy to send a follow-up with those questions if you wanted to see more about them.
You know, I'm always worried about mental health. So it says here, like, what would we like to see mid-year? So it'd be great to just get a check-in when we look at high school
Yes.
for that SEL category, how they're doing. Because I know the red, I am concerned
Yes.
about the 14 and 13.
Yes.
And I know it's a tough time, and I know I've said this before in our meeting, but our state ranks very low in mental health for our young people. And that's not going to change anytime soon. And so that's why schools are, I'm just like tooting our own horn here, but like, that's why we are so important to these kids. So just be, I'm just interested to see how they're doing. I am, like, one of my reactions, like, for the second question is, I am very happy to see that they're doing so well, like, academically. And I'm actually surprised, like, attendance-wise, positively surprised, like, what is that? Oh, anyways, my brain. Happily surprised, or yes, I'm great to see that. And then just for the January, is there a lag for this January attendance, or is that live, like January 27th? Is that
That's live. Our lag is 1 day.
1 day? Okay.
Because
So just like as a reminder, it's respiratory season and things like that for attendance. So I'm actually like, that's pretty good. I would say it's a tough time. So a year.
So I think generally the attendance number goes down throughout the year.
Yeah.
Right? Because
Yeah, I
missing
would.
10% of the days is missing, or like 18 days or something.
Yeah.
You have more time for your denominator and your numerator to change the
Yeah.
longer you're in it.
Yes,
Of course,
that's true.
when you start, everything's small.
Yeah.
And then there's the variance, and then the longer you're in the school year, you get more opportunity to be at school and change the numerator.
And then it gets better again sometimes if you have more days of school. 'Cause
Yeah.
Yes, because then you have a bigger
That's why
denominator.
it's generally for a whole school year.
One of the other things to note in the red, that also includes kids who just didn't answer any of the questions.
Yes.
So that
may be an
is
indicator.
important.
Oh, sorry to
Yeah,
interrupt you,
it
but
may
like
be an
indicators
indicator
well.
of a lot of different things. But
Yeah.
one of the tier 2 interventions that one of our high schools did around that in particular is they just pulled sat in, a nice team meeting with the right people, pulled the names of all those students, and there were a couple that, they just didn't fill it out, did some following up, but they did a very direct reach out to kids. There's a question on the SEL about, I see myself as having strengths, or I can identify some strengths of myself. And there were some students who did not identify any strengths. And so that was the group that the school psychologists and school counselors did a very targeted reach outs to who would not necessarily have been on our radar, because these were not kids exhibiting behavioral challenges. They may not even have had grade issues, but there may have been other things going on. So making sure they felt known, they were connected with, and they saw pretty good outcomes of some increase on at least some of those kids on the strengths the next time they did the survey. I think I'm over my time. So thank you.
Thank you.
And then,
Thank you.
just move that up there. Well, when we look at all the different ways of monitoring student growth and access, something we've talked about students served by special education. And one of the things that is really nuanced in our students who are served by special education is that they have IEP goals that are individualized just to their needs, to their areas of strength, their areas of growth. And we wanted to share a little bit about progress notes with you today, because progress notes are one of the ways that we measure for that individual student how they're doing on making progress towards their goals. Every student who's served by special education also is going to have these other components that we're looking at. They're going to be represented in those exact same bars that Jennifer was able to show you through Panorama. I think one of the questions was, gosh, how can we disaggregate some of these pieces and start to see and maneuver through them? And that's another thing that we can actually do in that database, that dashboard that Jennifer was showing. We can kind of move through and start to disaggregate really, really quickly, including for students served by special education. This is a pretty simple graphic, but showing one of the ways that we get to that IEP goal part. Every IEP meeting starts, we start to think about the students' present levels, and I'm sharing this part with you because we're going to share some progress notes, and they're snippets, and they're a little tricky to kind of follow and walk through. So every single one starts with, what is that student's present levels? What are their strengths? What are their areas of growth in each of the areas that they're working towards? And that's what drives those IEP goals. Those individualized goals are not going to look the same for every single student. They're going to be very, very distinct. And then, of course, there's instruction. But that progress monitoring that happens is when we start to report on those progress, we call them progress notes. And progress note time is another moment in time. I think Dr. Soyson talked about it as directional data. It's going to be a moment when we're going to pause and we're going to think about, what do we need to do with our student, what do we need to shift in our instruction that we can continue to make growth for this student. So just kind of that continuous cycle there. They matter so much, progress notes. They are a key moment in time when we're able to communicate specifically for an individual student. Where are we making that growth? Where are we seeing a need? Where do we need to pivot? And that's a moment that is shared directly with families. And just this screenshot is actually a quick piece of parent view. Just a couple years ago, we were printing and mailing home, right? And we were doing that with our report cards and everything. And now these pieces are directly in parent view, which has been a great moment so they can head right there. It's a key point of communication and clarification. And it is also required documentation as part of IDEA. So they are a requirement to support for any student who has an IEP at the same time as report cards. We talked a little bit, we saw some pieces of the tiers earlier, right? And we're thinking about those. And for many students, we'd be thinking about, this graph takes me even a moment when I see it. This particular graph is not every single student's experience of how the level of precision and intensity in that data collection. But there are times when we're going to be monitoring a student's goal, and we're going to be monitoring a student's growth on their behavior support plan or their IEP goals, and we're going to be tracking those. And for some students, when we might be thinking in that tier 3, right, we're really in that moment of we're thinking really deeply around the student's experience, how it is going through the day, navigating into the classroom, the hallways, the student school experience, that we actually will get to this level of precision in tracking a student's into a student's data. So it's not every single student that we have this level of data collection, but we did want you to be able to see an example that there are times when we are taking that student's experience very seriously to be able to really identify which parts of the day, where exactly are interventions guiding it. And that really does become additional directional data because it really does drive on a daily, weekly, monthly basis how we know our plan is working for a student. Progress notes in particular are at that report card time. So like, for example, this particular graph, which is pretty significant, would be summarized at that progress note time for an individual student. I'm not ready to get to the discussion yet on progress. Okay. I want to actually walk through these examples. These are redacted examples And
There's a couple areas that got missed, so I think we'll want to, this is identifiable, so we just
goodness, thank
turn
you.
it in at the end.
I appreciate that. So we're gonna, please note that there may be some pieces and we'll take these back as they have those. Thank you for catching that. These are screenshots from progress notes. However, they are also screenshots from components of a student's IEP. Because I wanted to kind of go back to that cycle, right? At the top, so I'm gonna look at that first one. The very top, we're gonna think about that student's strengths and how their strengths are gonna flow into the information on their present levels. Their present levels are really what is gonna guide that. So for example, in this very first example, we're looking at a student and we see even in the area of reading, we start to see strengths for that student, areas of growth for that student. And then while we don't have that same over time of a system of the exact same goal over time, which was something you were thinking about earlier, of how we watch those, what we do start to see is the previous year's goals. Where was our growth on that goal? What's our next goal for that student? What was progress towards that goal? And now maybe what's our proposed next goal? So that's what's going to happen through that scope of that present level. That becomes that student's IEP. I did not give you a screenshot of the actual goal page because it was directly into the present level. It would have been redundant there in that case. Then at progress note time, this part down here would be a screenshot of what that progress note would look like. This is the part that goes home to families along that time with report cards and helps us get to know where is that student and where does instruction need to shift or grow or change during that time. There are a couple of nuances. We think about systems and the nuances within them. And we have learned a lot. You might see some of these examples where a box gets a little bit longer. We've learned that some particular boxes, if you type too much in them, they just go straight down. And in other boxes, they more naturally move forward. And that's part of us being in just a little bit of time. We're, I think, on year 3, but of a new database system and that user experience of making sure that those components. But you will see, depending upon a student's when their annual IEP is, they may have more or less progress note periods at this particular time. So if we looked at a second example on the next page, and then I'll give you guys time to kind of peek through these. The second example, there's only one progress period, and that is just based on when that student's annual IEP happened, when that next progress component came forward. The third example is where you'll see a longer text box, right? A longer text box maneuvered forward in there, but there's always a space to both give that numerical score that's matching to that baseline that was represented in the present levels. There's a progress code in Synergy on these, and that progress code can be key communication for us if we're like, guess what? Lauren met her goal. That's a good moment for us to both celebrate and say, oh, we should come back together and identify what that next step is, what that next goal is. So those progress codes are key moments for us to recognize exactly what we need to do within each of those. So we don't typically look at progress notes we do in this, but in this moment of looking at what are all of our data systems, it's not always the individual data piece that happens within progress notes. And we thought it might be really helpful for us to think about that as another source of data. And I want to give you a moment to look at these and then just consider what do you notice, what do you want to know about with IEP goals and progress notes, and how they're interpreted by teachers and specialists.
I noticed on the third example that we have the progress summary in English and in Spanish. Is that something that the system automatically does the translation for us?
Such a good question.
And then do we have other languages that we can do that too, so that when the families get the progress notes?
Right now, that's something we are working on all the time in our system. So we've been able to, with our partners, our IT partners have been incredible helping us because this is a relatively new system for us. We've been able to work through the entire IEP process that can be translated into the languages. We've pulled up all the languages that we have represented and are able to have them directly there. Progress notes are not actually in the automated translation section
Okay.
yet by the database. That isn't something that the database is yet automatically doing for us, but the full IEP is the meeting notices, prior written notices, placement. So many of those key components. Our team members are de-identifying and working to use things like you can even use the translation features in like a Google document to be able to represent that.
Awesome, thank you.
Or many, obviously depending on the student's identification, goals might be more or less skills based,
Yes.
right? So going back to kind of my thing about skills, a parent would want to know what, I'll just take reading level for instance, right? A parent, the fifth grader might recognize that the goal is to read the fourth grade level this year, right? And so as a parent, I'd want to know, did my child reach that goal? But then also, what is my child's level relative to other students?
Yeah.
And I guess I'd want to know, as a board member, I kind of want to know, is there a way for us to know, for instance, like how often are our students meeting their goals?
Yeah.
Right? Is there a global number that says this percentage of our students are meeting goals at different grade levels?
Yeah, and I think we've tried to unpack this before. There's a couple of pieces that make that nuanced. Special education students are not a stable cohort. Students enter into special education and exit out of special education. And so that makes the cohort of students a little bit more nuanced to track and follow. Right now, we've been trying to think about what are some of the ways that we can do that and try to actually use those progress codes on there. So you can see like a 1 is, I think I said it the opposite way before, but a 1 is like I mastered my skill. A 2 is making adequate progress. A 3 is not making progress towards that goal. So those are, they're not very sensitive measures within that particular progress code. So I think that is one way to explore that. I don't know if it's like our best dipstick into really unpacking that, but I do think where we are able to start to look at students served by special education and their growth in those is when we come back to that dashboard and panorama, we're able to draw those connections to other assessments, not necessarily of students' individualized goals in the same like global way.
And these examples show kind of some social emotional learning or things about participation with academic learning, and the goals are interact, and that's what Jennifer was also showing on the dashboard. And more, we're seeing that the reason to drill down to look at tiers with interventions is how these interact. And that was one of the things we really wanted to bring forward. We felt like we hadn't shared much about how social emotional learning interacts with, and these progress notes, just looking at the examples show that. But there's skills involved in both. And when Jennifer was talking about the check-in and check-out piece, I mean, that's an example of an intervention that students learn some skills too. So that's kind of what we're trying to touch on and make part of our awareness.
So how is it determined that someone needs to be serviced by special education? Is it the parent? Is it the assessments that we do? Is it Ames Web? Is it the teacher's observation? Like how? And then do IEPs last through middle school? If it's like a behavior one or dyslexia? So how do those, like, I guess, how long is it continued before they test out?
So a student may come to the kind of space where we're evaluating for special education from a variety of places. Through, when we look at those tiers and interventions, we may be in the space of, our interventions, we haven't made the progress that we're hoping to make. We're going to consider a special education evaluation. A parent can say, I'm really thinking we need to consider a special education evaluation. A teacher can say that, right? So a variety of ways that we may get there. And then it's through an evaluation process that a team would agree to and a parent would provide their consent for, that we would then look to evaluate that student. Those evaluations are tied to very specific eligibility categories that are defined at the state and federal level. once you qualify in special education, that is, we need to do a reevaluation every 3 years to determine, do we continue to be eligible for special education? If we are in the space of, I don't think that this student needs to continue to be served by special education, we don't have to wait 3 years. We can come to the table and be in the space of celebrating that student's growth, where they are, conducting another evaluation. So you could do it more frequently than that, but we need to do it every 3 years as a reevaluation. An IEP to make these goals is annual. Every year can be more frequent, with progress being reported along with the report card timeline. Yeah. And it can go past middle school, can go through high school or age 21 for students, and last as long as a student is still demonstrating that that's their need.
I just wanted to appreciate you for these examples. These are really helpful. And when I personally think of IEPs, I do think of those skills or learning. I know we're talking about these progress notes, but I really like this graph. I'm like, can we go back to the, so I just want to say, I mean, I didn't know that teachers had to do this. So this graph, it's just like a kiddo that might have some interfering behaviors throughout the day, and a teacher can say like, the kiddo only had like interfering behaviors like 80% today. Oh my gosh, but I would just like to say that takes a lot of time for a teacher to do that for every kiddo in their class on an IEP who may have those behaviors. So I just want to commend our teacher. Oh, it's right there. I'm so sorry. I was looking at mine. Sorry. So I just want to commend our teachers for doing that. And you did mention in your remarks that when kiddos are making great progress, we can congratulate and celebrate with them. And I hope, and I'm sure it does. I hope it does happen for those kiddos experiencing those interfering behaviors, and that when they make good progress, we congratulate them. And so I guess that's a question.
Yeah.
Does that happen? Yes.
I think absolutely. And in
Yeah.
a couple of ways, I can tell you one of the reasons that I have this graph in particular is because it was also being used to celebrate the team.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Look at the work that is
Yes.
done for the student. Because
Yes.
when you are in it in that every single day and tracking those components, you may not always see it. So the data
Yeah.
helps us be able to see that story and to celebrate that story, or to know when we need to shift. There are many students who are actually a part of their own graphing, or in the tier 2 example that was shared around check-in, check-out, that is check-in, check-out would be here's my goals for the day.
Yeah.
And I'm actually getting that reciprocal feedback on those goals for the day at the end of that day, right? I'm getting that immediate feedback piece.
Yeah.
This particular graph, though, I do want to be really clear, is not for every single student. This would be for a student who is really at the top of that tier 3. We're really thinking very deeply. We have a large team, and I will tell you, we think very deeply around how to make that data collection as easy and efficient as possible.
Yeah, I think graphs like this are so great for that one single kiddo, but also looking at trends. And I mean, if you look at the graph, you can see Halloween was tough. It's interesting. We know those things. You can look at these holiday trends and things like that. So yeah.
You can also see sometimes every Friday's stuff for this kid.
Yes, and that's so interesting. And then also what I want to say, just out loud, is that when we look at, I know these are only a few examples of IEPs, but when we look at the behavior in some of these, a lot of them are self-management, or what average or average people might call transitions. And so it's not necessarily maybe behavior, it's just being able to transition from thing to thing, or activity to activity maybe. And so I just wanted to call that out. Maybe it's I understand that some kids might have behavioral problems, but some also just have self-management goals, like that they're struggling with. So I guess I had a lot of comments.
Yeah.
So that's all I wanted to say.
That's the beauty
Yeah.
of the
Yeah.
IEP process, is that it really can be individualized to what that student needs.
Yeah, yeah. Thanks for all your.
Swapping.
And we're moving.
Still remembering who we
Your
are.
names
Yeah.
and my glasses.
And just because they're rotating through doesn't mean it's the last time you get to talk to Lauren. So if you're kind of done, we can come back and revisit things too.
And we hope that this will be we'll surface some things, and then this can inform what we want next, is really our goal.
Yeah, and I think as these conversations are building through, you're going to hear some either repeated or reinforcement. As Lauren was talking about the tiers of looking at an IEP, that's going to pop up when we're talking right now. So we could have put together binders and binders and binders of data. So just know that I'm happy to have smaller conversations about the specific questions, and all of these are great. But we will spend some time looking at the larger packet in here is our fall and winter Ames Web data, so district-wide and for the 8 primary schools. But I wanted to start off just by kind of going through how do we use data and assessment. Vice Chair Vidal and Board Member Shoemaker, you've both been at, being a Beckman Creek principal also. I can look at the data. I feel this through the kid's point of view and the child's point of view and the school point of view. So I might be using some unidentifiable stories to reinforce kind of how this works. Okay. So first, somebody mentioned earlier, like, how do we see this year to year? Our Ames Web data, which you're going to have, which in here shows 2023 to current. We did switch things 2 years ago when we made the shift into our curriculum adoption and kind of what that looks like. We also shifted how we assess using Ames Web. It used to be all kindergartners took the Ames Web test assessment, and then in first grade, just students who were flagged as needing extra support. We now assess all students. So in 2023, it's kind of hard to, compare those apples to the 2025-26 apples. But we can look at just 1 year snapshot. So last year and this is a number of things. We have a new curriculum, but also, as I'm going to talk about tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 interventions. What does that look like? What's the end goal? The new curriculum gave us stability and a foundation, some better practices and alignment, not only within a school, but within a district, has really helped to see consistent growth with students. So here are our, famous Ames Web triangles, and this would be last year's kindergartners, and this is district-wide. And then I will again use it 4 years ago when I was at Beckman Creek as a first-year principal. My first year, we finished, and I was so proud of the work that our kindergarten teachers had done, because for the Ames Web, which really is looking at those foundational skills, it looked great. It looked like this. And then we got into first grade, and there was a large jump in what we expected first graders to do in fall from where they left off in kindergarten. And it kind of was just like, oof, well, how do we bridge that gap? And I think all of that was part of the conversation with the curriculum adoption. But now when you look at this is where our kindergartners were fall, winter, spring of last year as a district. So this is all 9 schools. And then when we look at fall and winter, here's where they jumped up into first grade. So again, it's always great. Sometimes we get bogged down, anytime are in testing season, whether it's map testing or Ames Web, or it's like, what does today's data show us? When we can look longitudinally, that's what's beautiful about map. It is not a moment in time. Like when people try to use map as how well are they doing today, it's the best when we can put year 1 to year 2 to year 3 and see those growth trajectories. So then kind of things that we use at the school level. So Ames Web, breaking this down. So anytime you see a triangle, there are many more triangles and data points attached to it. So looking at school-wide to grade level to classroom to then breaking down those, for reading and each of those phonemic skills. Then comparing that with what we're seeing in MAP when we have that data. So again, thinking back to those high-level directional and immediate pieces of data and how they all work in concert to make decisions. And then pulling in what Jennifer put in about our panorama data. So when we do get together in our school data teams across the district, we are looking at let's look at overall trends that we see within a grade level or a classroom. And then when we get into those more specific student-specific areas, there might be a couple pieces of data that make us extend the conversation, but it's always put up with kind of a backstop of what else are we seeing? Are we seeing changes in attendance? Are we seeing changes in behavior? Have we reached out to parents? So when you see quick fluctuations, what else might be there? Instead of just, again, one of the documents I shared with you that I won't have up here is we do not want to get into the quick response of labeling a student based on one data point, oh, they're a low MAP student, or they're low in Ames Web. We do not want to do that. We want to use all of these to build a composite of how we support. So it's not through a deficit model. It is really giving us more clarity on the individual skills and deficits for students to create a plan. And then, one of the most important pieces to connect back to earlier this year when we had Alex Swanson, kindergarten teacher from the district, where she kind of took what she was seeing in her classroom and then shared with you, well, here's what I would do with tier 2. Here's what I would do with. That represents a group of 5, I didn't get a picture of all of them, 5 students, and they are second graders. And these were students who, and we'll talk about the tiers here in a second, not tiers, but tiers. They were not meeting progress. What we would see, and we were worried, and they had gone through an initial 6-week period of time where they were in a pretty extensive intervention in not having progress. And then we were able to look at, so of the 5, 3 of the students are supported by IEPs, 2 are not, but they had very like needs. And at that point, you think about how do we, if it's not the curriculum, if it's not the time of day in which it's happening, how do we shift? So we shifted teachers who are working with them. Another teacher grabbed the students. These were 5 students from 3 different classrooms. We worked, you can't see that, but they are on week 6 right there, their intervention. And on that day when that picture was taken, after 6 previous weeks of kind of plateauing and thinking, well, do we start thinking about, for the 2 students who were not making progress and who are not served and supported by an IEP, is that the direction we're going? On this day, this teacher came down with these and was like, they've all met the mark on their progress monitoring. So again, one major shift that I've seen in the district in the 4 years that I've been here, we talk about circles of support, and that is our intervention model to really dial in and support kids at an individual level. Instead of it being, we need to collect support to get them on an IEP, it is we need to collect support to get them out of tier 3 and back into tier 2.
Can I ask a question or no? Is that,
Sure.
Okay, would you say that intervention model is a best practice at all primary schools, or is it a Beckman?
No, I mean, that is the beauty of my job this year. I was so proud of the work that we've done over 4 years at Beckman Creek. Then I hear, from the other 8 schools, and do we still have work to do on alignment? Absolutely.
Yeah.
But could any one of our principals come in here and talk about tiered instruction? Absolutely. Gosh, I gotta remember. Oh yeah, and this is just another. So this is looking at MAP on here, but I just wanted to. This is sometimes you look at the individual student level, like those 5 kiddos that made that progress, and you zoom in. But it's also really important to zoom out. So this is one of our Wilsonville schools, and it is fall MAP data in school-wide to winter MAP data. So if we look at our quadrants, we have high achievement, low growth. These are students where, probably need a little more challenge, but they also have smaller room to grow in that kind of percentile range. It might be a student who was scored in the 96th percentile and then scored in the 97th percentile, and yes, it is low growth, but it also kind of triggers they're in the 96th percentile. What are we doing? Because it's not just about intervening, it's also about extending at that tier 2 level. This is low achievement, low growth. This is when so I'm showing you a school level quadrant breakdown, but when we see students here, this is number one to be like, what are we doing? Because this is showing they have low growth and they have low achievement. And we have had them for how many years, weeks, months. This is probably one of my favorite areas because we know they're going into the upper right, but the low achievement but high growth. And there was a student in the last 2 years who had lived in this area every time. So similar to what I was telling you, that those 5 students that teacher ran up with. And it was, when I talk about, it is all the things that we are intervening with. This student moved into a grade level where they had multiple teachers working together, connected with them, had multiple areas of support. And it was, this student couldn't walk out the door with somebody asking him, supporting him. So there was that level of just the social piece. And I feel like our interventions were just slowly creeping up. And he would have been in this lowish achievement, high growth, but he was so close. So if you did just label him as a data point, it would have been low achievement, high growth. But in that whole cohort of 72 kids, he had the most growth of any other kid. So like those are also the things we have to celebrate. Not just, this is where we want to be, this is awesome, high achievement, high growth, this is just the sweet spot of where it is. So if you look here, this was fall, and then for this school in Wilsonville, that is winter. So all the grade levels in the school moved into that upper right quadrant. But this, I showed this at the school level. This is really great at the classroom level to dig in and look at what's next. Tiered instruction. Just gonna quickly go through that. So like tier 1, and these are sometimes misconceptions of, once you're in tier 2, you're out of the curriculum. So it is, coined, it's core instruction, tier 1. Tier 2 is core and more. Tier 3 is core and more and more. You are never sacrificing the grade level standards and expectations of the core. When you do move into tier 2, that tier 2 piece are the, kind of, I don't want to label it short-term struggles, but through, these directional data points, teacher formative assessments, just seeing when you are delivering the core that there's just something that's not quite clicking, and that is directed by the teacher. It often comes to the data team, but within that grade level team, they are making those decisions on which groupings need that tier 2 intervention within our core curriculum. And Alex just really painted the picture of this earlier in the year, where it is, I've delivered the core instruction in the morning, we break quickly, I have 5 kids back at the table, we are quick, systematic, hitting what they need. That group leaves, this next group comes in. But all of it, most important, it's not just time with teacher, that is really important, but tracking what we're seeing. So all of those formative assessment notes along the way, that's what, when you get your data team together, what allows you to paint that full picture of MAP assessment, Ames Web assessment, and the day-to-day growth. Because sometimes you do see a MAP test that comes back and just makes you scratch your head. It's like, none of the other data points match what we're seeing with that one MAP test. So, and then tier 3, kind of what I mentioned before, it is when we usually lagging skills that could be more than a grade level behind, just quick extra time in the core is not what they need. The extra intervention that's built into the core is not what they need. They need some supplemental to go with it. So, using our early literacy, we have UFly, where we have people who are trained to then step in and again, target those specific skills, find the most important piece that they need. And then it is daily instruction, 6-week intervals, and then coming back again to look and see, like those 5 kids, are we making progress? Are we not? Because, one thing you don't want to do is make a big, core more and more, and then the student just lives in the more for 6 months where the progress isn't being made. So it is targeted, and you want to see that kind of growth in the upper quadrant.
In the circles of support, do
Yeah.
the teachers make notes, like on each student of how they were reading in the circle?
Yeah. So who had the panorama data? Yes. When we do, so that's one piece where board member Wyatt asked, can we track, over the years when kids are moved into circles of support and they're in tier 1 to tier 2 to tier 3, they are putting in those progress notes. So we can see like, what is the tier 2 intervention? How long have you been doing it? So then when you do get together in data teams or those circles of support teams, as you move through, you just have that supporting documentation. And you're not left to go, I just have a gut feeling, because gut feelings really are hard to pinpoint.
I just want to say that getting really consistent and really effective with our circles of support progress is huge work. It's not, we have a lot of work to do to continue to get more consistent around the structures and support that we need across all of us, 16 schools. And we've made huge growth in the last year and a half. And again, just kudos to everyone that's doing that. I just want to also be clear, it's still an area of growth for us.
But it's an ultimate use of
Yes.
data
Yeah.
process,
Yes.
and that's the piece.
Yeah. Well, and it's also when, you have the shining moments, but there's also always something you feel like you're not quite doing. So, yeah,
So-
this will be endless work. It's like paving the
great.
bridge.
Everyone, I want to thank you for visuals like this that are so good, right? It's really helpful. I think I speak for everyone when I say the triangles, we love the triangle.
Yeah, I love it.
Yeah.
Visuals like that really help us see something that feels global.
Yeah.
Because I don't feel it's my job to dig down and say, what did this teacher do
Yep.
here, right? Although it's great to know what teachers do. I did have one question more along the intervention piece.
Yeah.
So when we were adopting primary reading a few years ago, right? And the state was asking how can the state support these things. I remember that discussion of high dosage tutoring.
Mm-hmm.
Can you tell me how that intervention plays in? Is that, like, when is that happening? How does that happen?
Yeah. So that is one of the things where the idea is consistent across the district. It's called different things, whether it's win time, it's that extra time. So I think we ended up calling it win time at Beckman Creek. I can use an example from what we have. We took a model where we used for our high dosage tutoring to get extra support. We spent the first 3 months training paraeducators so they could also teach that core supplemental material, UFly. So we just had more opportunities to meet the needs. So when we are, you go into a data team meeting with second grade, and then we are, for lack of better terms, segmenting kids into what they need, extension, intervention, tier 3. And then during that time during the day, there's a block, they are going to those groups.
I hear with that's
Yeah.
what I need, right?
What I need, yeah.
Heard
I
that
can't think of the other
schools.
acronyms.
Thank you.
Does each circle represent a number of
It
students?
is. No, it's a grade level.
Oh, a grade level.
Yeah,
Okay, that's
so-
helpful.
Oh gosh.
So the average.
Yeah, so this is the school, and I forget if I could hover over, I could see
Okay,
the grade level. These are just,
Okay.
the dots.
I'm just
But each
wondering
one of
what
those
the
is a grade
dots
level.
represent.
So
Okay.
overall school, combining all 6 grades, and
Okay,
then the 6 grades.
okay, great, thank you.
Now,
And again, it's powerful as a school, it's really powerful is as a
Yeah.
cohort.
It's very good.
For classroom teachers, this becomes a great graph too, so they
Yeah.
can see where their students are, and if the student's divided in an area over time too.
I like it.
Yeah. So then just in your packet, I'll give you some time just to go through the map data. What I did put together is just one kind of front and back. And this is just how, this is a school A and a school B, one West Linn school, one Wilsonville school, and how you can look at fall map scores to winter map scores and how they might compare to the fall Ames Web and winter Ames Web. And then kind of another just kind of infographic of what we talked about, just how we use all the data, what the tiers are, what they mean. So that's just the reference. And then you have, again, just dig in here in the next few minutes of our Ames Web information. And then we can chat about looking at the winter Ames Web data for a school compared to fall results. What are your noticings or questions? And that is a loaded question because there are thousands of questions we could ask.
So can you remind, so Ames Web is more foundational skills. MAPS is more like instruction of what they know in real time.
Growth and academics, yep.
And can you remind me, like, what 60-second means? Does that mean 62nd percentile?
Percentile,
Okay,
Yep.
thank you. I think
Yeah.
I always ask that question. Okay.
yes. Well, and the number of times I've had either a student conference about map data or a
Yes.
parent and they see
I'm like-
72nd, which
I'm
is
like-
really great, and they think it's 72nd percent or 72%, and it's percentile. So
Okay, that's
and
it. Okay.
percentile against nationally normed.
Okay.
Yep.
I think for those who have not seen an Ames Web assessment given, I know some of you have, but maybe this page right here, Greg, that you included, kind of shows, well, what does it include? There's things like auditory vocabulary, initial sounds, letter naming fluency, letter word sound fluency, nonsense word fluency, phoneme segmentation, some of those components. I think some of you maybe last year had asked to see that administered and got to see a little bit of that in action. Still time this year if that's something you're curious about, but that at least gives you an idea of what's happening there, and then based on what's heard and observed in those building blocks around early literacy formation, give this triangle.
So I think I'll hand it back over to Barb. And again, if you have questions as we move forward, always happy to have so much. So,
Thank you.
yeah.
And we promise we're not going to just keep going around. But one of the things that has come up, and Director Vidal, you mentioned it this evening, is looking at things broken down and looking at demographics. And one of the things that gets reported about school districts a lot is gap data. And what does gap data mean? And so some of the things that have been talked about this evening, the levels of data and drilling down a little bit can be helpful. So we're going to do just a real quick example of that. Going back to, Jennifer used the dashboard for Panorama, and this idea of those things on there like self-efficacy and whatever, and why that's important. So this is an example of self-efficacy, and we did all grade 3 through 12 students, and then grades 3 through 12 students in the ELD program, because you'll notice there's a gap. You know, the bars are different. So what do you do with that? But one little side note, why self-efficacy? The work with the Panorama survey, which was actually one of the first ones in the country that really drilled down to what do you ask students to find out things that matter for their overall health and well-being and for academic outcomes. Self-efficacy, it goes back to the 70s. Researchers started it, and it's just been the one that has held consistent. There's belonging, there's growth mindset, all of those are important. But the one linked to how students do is self-efficacy, and that continues to be confirmed. And it's based on thinking back to kind of the, Jennifer was also talking about some interviews with students. Something in the past I did well and mastered, and how is that like what I'm being asked to do now? And you have to drill down to do that. You don't just see that in the gap. Director Shoemaker asked about looking at norms and looking at nationally and whatever. And one of the things Panorama does is it kind of looks at a national data set. And you'll notice that when we see 53%, we'll say, oh, but that's in the 70th percentile nationally. And one of the things you can do on Panorama is not just look nationally, but you can also look to other non-urban school districts, and you can get districts that are a bit more like yourself. And we find that that's helpful. And one of the things that, you know, I think has been said, we don't have this mastered yet in terms of how we use these things and like, you know, circles of support, but using these tools and this dashboard is something that we really are looking at getting better at as well, with how do we do this with our principals and how do principals work this with our teachers and looking at these pieces together. So another part of the drill down is when you look at the individual questions. And actually some of the people who designed the Panorama survey are considered to be the experts in surveys in the country with social emotional learning surveys. And the state of Oregon now, kind of started out talking about there's going to be some things coming forward from the state that districts need to do. All districts now need to have students participate in this seed data. And it's something students take, they actually do it as part of OSAS. Self-efficacy is part of it, and they borrowed some of the questions from Panorama. Well, you saw that gap in the blue and the orange, but then you look at some of the questions for students who are currently in ELD and students who are not, and there's only 4% difference. So the gap that's an example of when you look at that, and that question is, how sure are you that you can do the hardest schoolwork? So that's something that we are starting to do in thinking of how do we shape the conversations with students? How do we look at the goals when we look at things like IEPs? You know, and how do we like plan using this? So it's an example where sometimes an overall gap, you know, 53% to 40% seems kind of daunting. When you look at some of the questions, like how certain are you that you can do the hardest schoolwork? And you see that, that's a piece that we're not looking at it to make it sound better and look better, but what do we really need to pay attention to? Yes, Dr. Woodward.
Are there any questions about this one, the drill down, the questions within the overarching?
And again, it was mentioned achievement and growth. All states now are really moving away from just the achievement and looking at growth also. There's going to be long-term growth targets set now as we move into the new accountability reports, and then your progress towards those. Part of it is to test how good the growth targets are, to see, and comparing across the state with like school districts. There's going to be a part of looking at similar school districts coming up with this, and Dr. Ludwig will be talking about this more as we get closer to the 2026-2027 school year. But that's why growth and achievement is important. So if you look at this, we are looking at all K-8 students. So this is just a massive look. And you look at the growth, which is 57th percentile. And this is all, this red, yellow, and green stoplight is a fixture of all of this, as you can see from the Ames web and whatever. But, yellow is, okay, you're starting to be on track. You're not in the red. But when you look at the growth for all K-8 students, it's in the, 57th. The achievement is higher. When you look at ELD students, you'll notice the growth is higher. Okay, because orange is closer to red in the color scheme, right? And so that's something that looking at, not just to say, oh, that's good news, but what are the factors in looking at this that's getting us closer? And sometimes that can be overlooked when you just look at a gap. One of the things, and this is what I'm going to direct you to in your packet, when we look at, this is a student profile, this is individual student profiles from MAP. And you look at school overall, which has, and this is from, this data, that 57% favorable self-efficacy, all students, 36% in ELD. But then we looked just a moment ago at, that's the conglomerate. When you look at some questions, it's much closer. Then you looked at how sure are you that you remember what you learned in your current classes. It's a little bit closer. Then this student's, a piece that came up on this report is that their self-reported social emotional learning scores show significant growth from fall 21 to fall 25, from 1.3 to 3.6, and it's 3.6 on a 5-point scale. So this is a student in ELD. And one thing to I always have to remind myself in ELD that students don't stay in this, for their whole school career, because when a student comes in as a newcomer, their self-efficacy and knowing what's going on in class and can they do this might be significantly lower. But this is another example in looking at this. Then if you look down below at this layers piece and look at the trajectory for this student, and this goes over time, starting in fall 23, and this is a 7th grader, and then going up and going, and one of the reasons you think, well, why would it go up and back down again? Well, in mathematics, especially when students start moving into algebra, historically we see that. But then we're looking at the overall climb and what's projected. So that's just another piece. You've seen a lot of stripy bars from NWEA map, and this evening you saw the quadrant map, but looking at this profile is part of this also.
So Barb, we couldn't see your pen pointing on your screen. Can you just show it on this screen? Oh, yeah. So there they are in 5th grade.
Yeah, they're in 5th grade, and they're here, and it dips, and grow. And then when you get up and you start getting into our middle school, where we have put algebra standards in the sixth grade math courses, you see, oh, that dips a little. But then you're looking at the climb, it's 219 here, and now it's at 230 most recently. And that's showing, again, the growth piece, where sometimes if you just look overall at gaps, as reported, especially on OSAS, and it can happen for math, just in achievement, you don't really see, but what progress are you making? And the real importance of this, and in the packet that you have, the one that is not, it's not the same as the slides. I'd like you to take that out for a minute and just like Lauren walked you through with IEP goals. If you look at this one right here, because this was too hard to show on a slide, you need to look at it up close. So this is back to the panorama dashboard. This is for the 7th grade student, a student who's in the ELD program, and it's how we look at efficacy and achievement together. So you look at, and this is what Jennifer started out with, looking at the overall social emotional learning, which efficacy is a part of, behavior incidents, attendance, and then academics. And then you see next to it, the blue dots are the efficacy pieces from fall to spring, going back to fall 2021. And the student is now at a 3.6 on a 5-point scale. So that's showing growth. English language proficiency also is one where, when you don't necessarily, there's a rise when you're in the red, when you're a newcomer, and then you kind of even out. And in the 4 domains, like this student right here, the reason it looks like it's kind of a flat line is the student is just fine in passing the ELPA on speaking and listening, even in reading. Writing is still the piece that isn't there, and that's typical. But that would keep you in panorama. It's kind of like Dr. Ludwig's, the 5-point scale. It keeps you in that level sort of thing, the way it's color-coded there. But if you didn't drill down, and when you look at these dots online, which I can't do without it giving away, too much of that who the student is, you can see that, but there's been quite a bit of progress there. So it kind of goes back to the importance of doing that. You see, and I just put OSAS on there because you also see, in English language arts, the student wasn't speaking English, and now, looking at that climb, and also looking at, especially in you looking at the change from 4th and 5th grades to 6th and 7th and 8th grade OSAS, there's a jump again. So you do see these peaks and valleys, but then also considering math. And so that's one of the things we're trying to do, is looking at these things together. But the other pages here are the student profile, and just a couple things I want to point out. Like this student, when you look at growth, you'd say, but I thought you just said growth can be better than achievement. But as Greg was saying, new learning is really important for growth, especially in mathematics. This report, except that it's another 6 pages and I opted not to print it, this student profile report down here, Director Shoemaker, when you asked about skills in this blank white space, it lists the skills that the student should be working on next based on that. And this student having a lower growth score, this student is ready to have more difficult math skills, and it shows that. And our teachers are actually using this in the middle schools when they prepare for conferences. Students look at their profiles in math and kind of look at, what am I doing? And you can see that it also breaks it down into the instructional areas, so it's not an overall map. or an overall math score. Then when you move, and again, you see the little projection over time, and look at reading, and you'll notice that the achievement is lower than the growth. Well, this is a student whose first language is not English. Then when you look at the last page, because we also can assess reading in Spanish with NWA map, and look at the achievement.
It's the same student.
The same student. So I just wanted to illustrate some of the complexity, and Lauren was showing some of that complexity with looking at goals and setting goals for regulating, using your time, meeting expectations, as well as reading fluency, sort of thing. And Jennifer started out giving an example of the students who, you have to look at what you find out from check-ins, and you have to look at things to look at working with attendance, that this is what we're actually doing in our schools, and again, as Jennifer said, we're not there yet, but this is the kinds of process and the kinds of things that are looked at in circles of support, that are looked at when, for example, right now, I think you sent an email, was it Friday or this morning, I don't know, but about the panorama, well, this is for other panorama results, just send an email saying panorama results are in. And then there's protocols in looking at them, whether they're for students, whether they're for staff, which is another part. And we do the same with map results. So there's this overall look, but then there's the grade level teams. Then there's the departments that do the same thing. They don't have map, but they'll look at report card data to look at that. And that's what Jennifer was showing you about the student with the D, and looking at, okay, but where is that student in all classes? So that's kind of what we're trying to do, is just show you some of these layers with examples from some of these reports, so you can see how then we look at what do we need to do next. And again, the NWEA map actually lists, this is what this student needs to be working on skill-wise. That's really helpful in reading and math to have further growth. So with that said, just is there anything that stands out when you look at academic and self-efficacy data together? I know that we're kind of throwing a lot at you, and then after we talk about that, I think Dr. Ludwig is going to talk about where we might go next with this.
Madam Chair.
Yes.
I'm really glad that we collect the self-efficacy data and the student growth mindset data. I think that's a positive thing. I want to know how to, I'm just going to say, I would have trouble explaining to a parent of a student why we look at those data together, given the fact that on the panorama pages, it seems to really lag the other academic and attendance and behavior indicators. And so given that disparity, how would I describe that to the parent that was asking why, given that disparity, is it such a large portion of my individual students' report?
In looking at what influences academic data, some of the panorama data, growth mindset's part of it, but especially self-efficacy, really, if you see that a student doesn't think they can do the hardest work, or some of the other questions on that slide that I showed you of, do I think I remember what I did in school last year, next year, sort of thing, that is something that we can work on with students. And that's everything from life class in high school, advisory in middle school, morning meeting in, and that the curriculums that we have, the second step curriculum, That's what social emotional learning is, just how you have the conversations. And sometimes it's by things like letting the students see their own progress, because we assume that they might know that they, unless you saw that visually, they wouldn't understand that about their own learning. So engaging them and looking at that has been shown to be, and this isn't just what we see, but there was the research that led us to do that in the first place, is one piece. And then sometimes in finding out, why don't you feel like you can do the hardest work? Then when you drill down and get that, you get some things like, oh, here's some things that I should be offering, maybe through small groups, some things that I should be actually doing with students in my classes. So teachers can use that data to plan. It's pretty hard to use just an overall score, especially on something like OSAS, and say, so what does that tell me? It kind of shows the areas of what's writing, what's this, and that's about it. And so MAP gives more specifics about that. I think in high school, again, and speak to this, the more that you have standards-based grading, the more you're looking at the content. What can they actually do with what they're learning? Ames Web is a drill down, IEP goals are a drill down. So it's a way for students to start to see and teachers to see, how do we look at these things together, in the classroom, because they do affect each other. And nationally, growth in states, it started in Colorado, I think, and now Oregon has used just these growth metrics. I mean, they actually make the metrics to look at growth, and to grow and go better, you have to kind of believe, have the growth mindset that you can do that. Is kind of simple, and I think others can probably elaborate or.
Did you get your question?
Yes.
Okay. Jennifer, can you remind us, in this thermometer that's the social emotional learning, how many overall questions make up this thermometer? There's several categories, and then there's about 5 questions within each category.
And at middle school and high school, there's a whole additional section about cultural awareness. That is not in the 3 through 5, not because we don't care about that, but just because they're not normed.
Yeah.
Nationally for that. So where things like, I can talk about issues of race in my school, things like that. So I would have to go back and
Yeah,
look at
there's
the
a lot
total
of
number, but
questions that go into
it's
this thermometer than just those 2.
I think there's about 40 altogether, and it's kind of nice because there's 5 to 7 in each one, and so it's not too long. Director Vidal, you asked about mental health.
Yes.
And another thing that our district participates in, every 2 years is a student health survey, and grades 6, 8, and 11 that gets at those topics, and you can see the comparison, district, the state averages, and then each school. And that again starts in middle school. But if you wanted to see some overall data about that,
although that one, this is not an anonymous survey, so that we can actually have data about, we teach social emotional skills, so we want to know how kids are doing in those. And we can intervene sometimes if a student has had a big drop or something like that. That might be, it doesn't necessarily mean anything, but it should make us ask questions and learn more about what's going on for that student. Whereas the student health survey is an anonymous survey. So we wouldn't use it to intervene with particular kids, but it could give us an idea within our school district, what's happening for kids around suicide awareness, or do they know to go get resources, that kind of thing.
Okay.
So that's a difference in those. They both are important as we think about overall mental health, but they have different purposes.
Yes. It's good to know.
By looking at the assessments, it's very encouraging to see the growth, especially with the maps and the Ames Web. But I still see that we have some schools that are still being screened and they need that additional intervention and that additional support. With our budget challenges that we have, are we still able to throw the support at those schools with the teachers or learning specialists, things like that? Are they getting that support where they're not feeling overwhelmed, addressing the gaps at some of our schools?
That is the question in Oregon, right? That's the question for legislators and the governor, because when you're reducing a budget, and we can reduce in a lot of ways, and then at some point, there is reduction of staff. And so I think we all saw when we had literacy coaches, we had to reduce those. We've had to go up in class size. So teachers would say, I don't get to some students maybe as frequently as if I had a smaller class size. So that means maybe more students then need more intervention support because the teacher is doing as much as they can in that core. So the whole system would say, systemically, if you reduce supports and you increase class sizes, the whole system's going to say you'll see an impact, which we're seeing in our district. And teachers are saying, when I have more kids, I can't get to as many students. I then need more support staff, or that we've reduced support staff. So that's where we've come to you as a board and said, if this is all we're going to get, how do we then rearrange or consolidate or bring supports where we can? And we make difficult decisions to try and then bring grade levels, class sizes down, and to maybe bring more supports within one school instead of stretched across two schools. And those are the questions that you're going to see, that you see asked in school districts. How do we do more with less? And then, we're hearing from our teachers, and you made some decisions this year because you were hearing from teachers too.
Yeah.
That it's hard to keep doing more in a class size that's bigger. And when you want to see momentum, you don't want to let go of those things. You want to keep going. And so teachers are trying to keep that momentum going with less support, and fewer adults maybe sharing the overall support responsibility.
I can see that, attendance probably will, when we look at this discussion, like what's next, I'm sure attendance will be tracked, graduation rates. I know you don't have like a crystal ball and that you're not psychic, but do you think that ODE will require us to measure some of the things we're already measuring, or do you think they'll have us measure brand new things that we're not measuring yet? I'm just, what am I trying to ask you? Do you think they'll give us new burdens that we don't have yet? I guess.
Well, we know in that Senate bill, in the accountability framework, couple things, and Barb mentioned it, the frequency with which they want to make sure board members are getting input. So you've had it as a goal. We've brought these updates to you. Now it's not going to be whether a board asks for it or not. It's just going to be required. The interim assessment, now there's a short list that school districts can choose from, an approved short list. So interim assessment can't just be, we just found something that we've decided we want to adopt and buy or have. ODE has vetted a short list. MAP is on that short list. There's a few others. So we want to take it. So now there could be some comparison of districts who have similar interim assessments. Those markers of what is it that school districts are measuring, we know that attendance is on there, graduation, what we call 9th grade on track is on there. They've added a few more. They've added 8th grade math. They've added K2 attendance and not just overall attendance. So there's a few more. And then they've told districts you can also choose another indicator if you want to measure. So they're just going to collect more, not that we were already measuring it, But on the report card you've seen those report cards, there's those 5. They're gonna increase that and they want to track a few more.
Could I ask you another question? Or-
Yeah.
Is that okay?
Mhm.
Some school districts at the OSBA conference I attended were worried that providing information, more information would be tied to state funding dollars. So like, let's say they say say you need to track 4, but you can track 5 if you want. Like, will it be tracked to funding dollars, or do we know that yet? Or is this just assessments?
So
Right now.
I'm not sure what the context of that comment was that you brought
Okay,
to
okay, you were
OSBA.
not there, so you
Yeah.
were not in the room. Yeah.
So I would just have to query what
Okay,
they
okay.
meant by that.
Okay.
You know, I
Like
think,
penalized for not making, let's say there was like a goal, like a
Mhm.
percentage goal. This was not me and this was not like our district, but I guess the district was worried that like if you didn't meet a certain goal, like percentage goal, then maybe funding would be tied to that goal and you wouldn't get it.
so within that accountability framework,
Yeah.
there is now this notion of if you're not meeting those growth targets.
Yes.
Then there's gonna be, the first step is we're gonna come in and, as ODE, provide support.
Okay.
Then the next step is, do you need some coaches?
Okay.
Then over time, this idea of if a district is still not meeting,
Yeah.
there may be this review. And
Okay.
again, we don't know exactly the details of how this
Yes.
is looking, but the idea
Yes.
around the legislation, the accountability is, do we then need to come and see how a district is managing resources and funds
Mhm.
tied to making a difference around student learning outcomes?
Mm-hmm.
And may even have some say around that. So it's not like the dollars would go away, but
Okay.
it would be this more accountability towards how is a district spending their funds.
Okay, okay, maybe you need to direct it towards this goal
And-
more.
yeah.
Okay.
And
okay.
ODE is still, the challenge of
Working
when there's legislation, which is just this
Yeah.
idea of enact this
Mhm.
expectation, then ODE has to get into the details and have to say, so what does that mean?
Mhm.
And how do we implement something like that? And that's the part they're still working on, and
Okay.
there's some time for that.
Mhm.
But there is this idea of if a district is not making traction around learning outcomes towards those growth targets,
Mhm.
and there's been some support, and there's been this,
Mhm.
this idea of some tutorial coaching and expertise that's come in around professional development for teachers, and it's still not happening, then there might be this review of, we may have to come in and just really see, is this a systemic management issue around resource
Mm.
and decision-making that's happening?
Mhm.
So it's not, you remember the years of the sanctions?
Yeah.
It could be thought of that way, but ODE and legislation is saying this is not about sanctioning and taking away. It's about, is there something in that district's systems where,
They need support and help.
and beyond
Hopefully,
just this
yeah.
outside consultation and tutoring to, maybe we need, somebody needs to come in, and ODE would be that arm to say, we're going to come in and do, and provide even more direction
Mhm.
around how things are going.
And maybe just as a follow-up to what Vice Chair Vidal was saying, I mean, I do think it's worth noting, and this is more of a statement than a question, but, we're obviously ahead of the game.
Yeah.
We've added this reporting module, it sounds like, to our synergy. I'm guessing there's a cost associated with that. We obviously are gonna have more reporting, on these different goals. We're gonna be putting it into the format that ODE wants, and I think, I just wanna, first of all, just say thank you for being ahead of that curve on having all of these data reports, but then also just naming that, like, we are in a time where, yes, budgets are tight, and so this is adding one more
Mhm.
requirement, it's adding more work. I'm not saying that's a good or a bad thing, but I think this is just another example of, we want more accountability, we want to be able to share out this information, but there is a cost to that. And I think, I just want to say that, I mean, I recognize that, and I think as we think about the costs that we incur, again, all of this is something that has to be done. And so I'm glad we're ahead of it, but I also think it's very timely in just the fact that we're, you know, our budgets are constrained, and this is another thing in addition to everything else we do.
We already have a budget line item for interim assessment. Some districts don't.
Yeah.
So it's a cost for them now to think about this requirement and to budget for that. We have that budgeted in, it's an area that maybe a district might be thinking, ooh, I'm gonna reduce that so I can save staff. Now they can't, you know, so it just, every district's gonna have to absorb this expectation around what does it mean to demonstrate with data and your systems accountability to the state. And I hope that what you took away overall from tonight is there are these large bands of data, but the question of how do teachers pivot is really about systems that allow us to go deeper, 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 and asking what's happening for a student, a group of 5 students, a student where we might get just complacent about the gap or feel overwhelmed by the gap. But when we look at the questions, we can say, actually, the student's doing really good with 4 of the 5 questions. It's just this one. What's happening? Well, they just arrived in the country and they don't have this one skill yet, but maybe over time we can get at that one. So we've got aligned systems, we've got a data dashboard, and we can get to some of those discrete things in a less cumbersome way, even though this looks like a lot, but a teacher can get to those discrete areas easier now than maybe in the past. And our systems can talk to each other. We're getting better with that as well.
So Barb, in partly an answer to that question, what do we want to see next? So I continue to want to see those global numbers, right? So we saw an individual 7th graders sheet there, right? So I'm going to want to know, like, what's the global number,
Context,
right?
yeah.
And it's very crude to have that number. And as Director Vidal had said, also, how is that broken down to like students on IEPs, students receiving ELD services, right? So, and I know that gets tricky because there are a million ways to fragment that. So I want to make sure that, and we can be thoughtful about it. I think over time we've mentioned some specific
Some we can't.
pieces.
Yeah.
So when you get those report cards, which in your binders, you have for each school on the report cards is kind of that big, how did this school do with OSAS? How are they doing with attendance? And then we can show over the years, how is the school doing, knowing that that's a different group of students every time, you know. So this year's 7th grade was last year's 6th grade, was the year before's 5th grade. So there's, you know, some of that, but then even within that cohort, kids are changing schools or different things too.
Now that we have the state's 3 assessments, you know, how do we do that in a way that gives us meaningful, because I think that's what people want to know is, are we making progress?
Yeah.
And if we're not, it's not, okay, if something's wrong. It's like, okay, so what's going on here?
So what I hear you saying, Director Shoemaker, I kind of went back to this first Q1, which is where we had very much global, but, and then kind of looking at, we also heard, how do we actually use it? So we're trying to do a little bit more of that. We heard, how do we actually decide what interventions are and what they should be and if they're working, sort of thing. So we're looking for the sweet spot, you know, to bring those pieces together so there's understanding of how they work together. But I think we hear that, so.
Dr. Levy, can I just say one thing? The thing that excited me most about what Dr. Soyson shared, and it goes back to your question about special education eligibility. And if I'm thinking about this 7th grader and seeing where they are in these growth trajectories, and if I'm only looking at their OSAS data of reading and language arts, I might say, gosh, I really like that student to be making more progress. Are we doing enough? should we be, some people might wonder, should we be considering special education eligibility, if there was other data? And then you go back and you see the Spanish data and you see, oh my goodness, this student is achieving at a very high level on those same concepts in Spanish in their first language. And so that helps us know this is not about a disability. We are in language acquisition and we are right on track. So without that second data point for a multilingual learner, that's where sometimes school districts and sometimes in our past have ended up with some disproportionality around multilingual learners. So I just think it's really important what Dr. Swisson has done to support that dual language and having that data that gives us just a very different picture when we know that.
And added, what we're learning is when you give just the big picture, like in math reading for learners, you are not necessarily looking at the areas for instruction. So this is going on in some work that other school districts are doing around us. So you'll see, oh, there's this score. They must need more just foundational skills, especially if they're in K2. Then when you start to drill down, it's not that those go away, but if you just stay and do that and you're not working with the 5 pillars and starting to work with comprehension, overall vocabulary development, and oracy and writing, you see when you look over time this stagnation. So we want to use the Ames Web, and Dr. Ludwig pointed out these are the specific things that looks at in the context of math that has instructional areas, and K2 foundational skills are part of it. But even when children are learning foundational skills, if they don't understand a purpose for reading or start to do something, what happens is, because there's a lot of national data that shows that, is you just flatline. And that can happen like in 3rd or 4th grade, if that's all the attention. So we're trying to look at that too, when you work with new reading programs, when you look at how you use precious time in school, as well. So it does kind of, when you drill down a little bit, it does inform your academic program. And that's what we're attempting to do.
Did I understand you to say you want this back?
Yeah, could
Yes.
Lauren have
Oh,
those
sorry.
back because they're about progress notes for specific student. Even though there's a pseudonym, there's very identifiable information in there for the student.
There you go.
But you can keep the rest of it.
Oh,
So we have one more opportunity to bring data to you. In the fall, we can kind of show you what happened in the spring. Kids are now on different grade levels. We showed you some information. We had some teachers come. This is kind of midway. They haven't taken their OSAS yet, but we wanted to show you generally how are we pivoting, how are we going deeper so we can make an impact in between. So when we get to that kind of end of the spring, when is the OSAS window, Dr. Sosin, do you remember?
it's open.
Okay, when is it
In science,
closing?
June
Unfortunately.
3rd or something like
But
that. yeah.
maybe we can bring you something, although I think to get to that big indicator, we have to kind of wait till OSAS.
Yeah.
Like, is a lot of this leading to some of that grade, 3 and up? So we could even do something in the summer if you want, if we get some of that and it's
Yeah.
official.
To start the next school year, you could look at that.
Yeah, but maybe in the spring, because you wanted, your goal was something quarterly, which is
Yeah.
fall, winter, spring. This is the winter one. Give you something late spring before we get out, but maybe what we really want is something summer that we have OSAS to kind of see. Are we hitting some big mile markers around programmatic standards? Unfortunately, graduation doesn't get confirmed till even later.
You're psychic. I was gonna, yes.
If
you do.
if either any of you individually want a fireside chat to say, I want to go, it may not be everybody's interest, but I want to kind of see what happened with last year's graduation, drill in. Anybody could come if one of you wants to watch an Ames assessment being given, an Ames Web or something like that. Between now and that time, we can do some individual fireside chats or walk-arounds as well. And then this is just, again, this is from ODE. looking at their summative end of the year, interim, that's the one now they've made a short list of what districts can get, and then formative is just the idea that, of course, we're doing stuff all the time.
Any other questions, comments? Thank you so much.
Yes.
This was an amazing work session.
Yes.
A lot of work was put into that. It was very thorough, easy to understand, and just had a lot of good data points, just showing the whole student outcomes along with the growth.
Okay.
All right, work session's adjourned.
Ooh, I just want to clap. That's my favorite one.